It was a morning unlike any other in Istanbul. The call to prayer had just faded across the rooftops. Yet the city buzzed with an energy not seen in decades. Limousines slid past Ottoman stone. Security agents whispered into their sleeves, and translators rehearsed lines in 7 different languages. Inside the Golden Crescent Conference Hall, a summit unlike any before was about to begin. The event was the Global Dialogue for Justice and Cultural Harmony. The goal was lofty: bring together the most influential political and spiritual voices from across the Islamic world, Africa, South America, and Asia. Not to argue, not to lecture, but to listen. And somewhere in the background, unnoticed by many, walked a man in a simple brown suit. No bodyguards in sight. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, president of Burkina Faso, one of the youngest leaders in the world, a soldier turned servant, not the headliner, not even expected to speak long. But as fate would have it, history had something else planned. The Iranian delegation was center stage with senior advisors, scholars, and a noted cleric representing the teachings of their supreme leader. Cameras clicked. Reporters leaned forward. It was no secret that many nations in that room had delicate or non-existent diplomatic ties with Iran. Tension hovered unspoken. The host welcomed each leader with ceremonial precision. From the Emir of Qatar to the Prime Minister of Malaysia, they gave brief, careful statements about peace, resilience, and tradition. The words were correct, the tone safe. Then came the unexpected. I now welcome the President of Burkina Faso, Captain Ibrahim Traoré. A hush, whispers, a few raised eyebrows. Some delegates even glanced at each other as if asking, why him and why now? But Traoré stood, no speech in hand, no teleprompter, just a thin notebook tucked in his palm and a calm look in his eyes. He adjusted the microphone, glanced briefly across the crowd, and exhaled. What he was about to say wasn't long, but it would leave an imprint far deeper than any speech that day. Because unlike the others, Traoré wasn't here to play it safe. He wasn't here for headlines. He came to say what only a free man could say and what few in that room were ready to hear. And when his eyes rested for a moment on the seat where the Iranian delegation sat, something shifted in the air. No hostility, no fanfare, just a silence so deep the world for a brief second seemed to hold its breath. Long before the cameras rolled and long before the world held its breath, there was a quiet room 2 floors above the main hall. Room 214B. It wasn't on the official map of the summit. No press, no podium, just thick carpets, 2 pots of mint tea, and a small window overlooking the Bosphorus. That's where President Ibrahim Traoré was invited by the Iranian delegation. Not the supreme leader himself, of course, but 3 high-ranking diplomats, 1 scholar from Qom, and a man whose eyes had seen revolutions come and go. Traoré entered the room alone. The oldest man stood and bowed slightly. We respect men who speak softly and carry their dignity, he said through a translator. There was no fanfare, no formal address, just men from 2 ancient lands, Persia and the Sahel, sharing something older than politics: silence, presence, and the weight of memory. Then came the moment no one had scripted. One of the Iranians, with weathered hands, reached into a worn leather bag and pulled out a book. Not new. The corners bent, the pages marked with ink. A copy of The Fortress Within, a philosophical essay handwritten decades ago by a jailed revolutionary turned cleric, known later to the world as Iran's supreme leader. He handed it to Traoré with both hands. This is not a message, and he said, it's a mirror. Traoré took it gently. He didn't promise to read it. He didn't make a grand statement. But what he did next would shape everything. He opened the back cover, pulled out a black pen from his pocket, and scribbled a short note. Not for the press, not for politics, but for himself. Strength that does not shout, fire that does not burn others. This is the kind of leadership I must remember. He closed the book. No one spoke. For a few seconds they simply sat, 5 men in silence, interrupted only by the soft clink of tea glasses. And then, just as quickly, it ended. They stood. A handshake, a nod. No photos, no agreements, just a moment. When Traoré left that room, Something in his stride had changed. Not because he had agreed with Iran, not because he had aligned with a doctrine, but because he had seen a side of leadership not taught in textbooks or campaign rallies. That night, back in his hotel, he would sit by the window overlooking the mosques of Istanbul and reread one line from that book over and over. The loudest man often has the weakest cause. What he would say on the world stage the next morning would not be about politics or power. It would be about a kind of dignity that passes between human beings quietly, honestly, and without applause. But the world would hear it anyway. The hall had never been this quiet. As Captain Ibrahim Traoré approached the podium, even the translators paused. Delegates adjusted their earpieces, waiting for the typical opening lines. Gratitude, statistics, maybe a quote from Mandela or Sankara. But Traoré didn't start that way. He looked out over the room, scanned the faces. Some tired, some guarded, some curious. "I come from a land where dust covers the feet of children before books ever do," he began softly. "Where we've learned that silence is sometimes our only shield and our only teacher." There were no notes in front of him, just a small notebook in his hand and a calm, unwavering voice. "I was told to speak about culture, justice, and global cooperation," he continued, "but I will speak about something smaller, something quieter, something that may last longer." He paused. "Yesterday, I was given a book," he said, "not by a head of state, not in front of cameras, just one man to another. It was written by someone you may know, someone some of you fear, others revere, the supreme leader of Iran." A ripple moved through the crowd. Some eyebrows rose. A few heads turned. But Traoré raised his hand gently, almost like a teacher calming a restless class. "I will not speak of politics. I will not speak of governments. I will speak of a sentence, just one, that stopped me." He opened his notebook. "The loudest man often has the weakest cause." He closed the notebook again. "I come from a continent where our voices were silenced for centuries. But now that we speak, we must not become the loudest in the room. We must become the clearest." He took a breath, scanning the crowd again. "I do not agree with every man I meet, but I respect any man who carries his beliefs without the need to trample others. And that includes the one who wrote that sentence." A long silence followed. He leaned closer to the microphone. "In Burkina Faso, we say you don't have to like a river to drink from its water. If we want peace, if we want truth, we must be willing to drink from rivers we once avoided, even if it surprises us, even if it humbles us." Gasps, then stillness. In the corner, a camera flash went off, but most eyes stayed fixed on him. He didn't preach. He didn't praise. He just stood there and told the truth. Not the kind that divides, but the kind that disarms. He ended with a simple line: "Real justice begins when we stop fearing those we don't understand and start learning from them." And with that, Captain Traoré stepped back. No fist-pounding, no grandstanding, but the world leaned in just a little closer that day. For a full 10 seconds after Traoré stepped away from the podium, no one moved. Not a cough, not a shuffle, just silence. It was the kind of silence you don't plan for, the kind that creeps up your spine and reminds you that something important just happened. Then slowly, a woman from the Moroccan delegation rose to her feet. She didn't clap, she just stood. Then a scholar from Indonesia. Then a young man in a Senegalese robe, his hands trembling slightly as he stood in the third row. And finally, applause. But it wasn't the wild, camera-ready kind. It was slow, reverent, a kind of applause that said, "Thank you for saying what none of us dared to say." Meanwhile, in the far corner of the room, the Iranian delegation sat in stone-like stillness. No smiles, no frowns, just watching, listening. The lead Iranian diplomat, a man in his late 60s with a gray beard and piercing eyes, whispered to the scholar beside him, "This boy carries the weight of an old soul." Across the globe, the reaction was instant. Within minutes, clips of Traoré's speech flooded Twitter, TikTok, and Telegram. But it wasn't the political class that shared it first. It was the youth. A student in Lebanon posted, "I don't know who this man is, but he just gave the most respectful, powerful shout-out to Iran I've ever heard from Africa." A human rights activist in Berlin wrote, "He didn't praise Iran. He praised restraint. That's different. That's brave." Even a Western journalist known for her sharp criticism tweeted, "This young African president just gave a masterclass in nuance. He didn't flatter. He didn't condemn. He built a bridge with a single sentence." Back in the summit hall, the moderator stumbled to regain the floor. "Thank you, President Traore, for those thought-provoking words." But the energy had shifted. You could feel it. Some leaders scratched out parts of their speeches. Others leaned into their aides, whispering frantically. A few, sensing they couldn't follow that act, quietly exited the hall to avoid going next. Behind the curtain, Traore sat alone in the green room, sipping water. He wasn't scrolling his phone. He wasn't talking to staff. He just stared at the floor. A young Turkish assistant entered nervously. "Sir, they're asking if you'd be open to interviews. The BBC, Al Jazeera, CNN." He looked up, smiled faintly. Let the speech speak for itself. Outside, people were still buzzing. In a rare moment of candor, the South Korean envoy told a reporter, "I've been to 50 summits. I've heard 1,000 speeches, but that was different. It wasn't about Iran. It wasn't even about Africa. It was about how we listen and how we don't." And perhaps the most unexpected reaction came from an Iranian delegate himself. As he passed a reporter, he stopped and said quietly, "That young man reminded us that even our enemies read our books." The world hadn't just heard a message. It had witnessed a shift. Traore hadn't picked a side. He'd redefined what it meant to speak with courage and compassion in the same breath. While the world buzzed about the speech, upstairs in a nondescript conference room with bad coffee and flickering lights, the real architects of the moment sat in silence. They weren't diplomats. They weren't press officers. They were Traore's inner circle, a ragtag crew of former student organizers, cultural historians, and one ex-journalist from Ouagadougou who now ran communications like a battlefield medic. Kade, the lead media strategist, was pacing. "Do you realize what just happened?" he muttered. He name-dropped Iran in front of the West, in front of the Gulf, in front of the cameras, and no one can touch it. Beside him, Mariam, the youngest in the team and a digital analytics genius, was refreshing Twitter every 5 seconds. "We're trending in 10 countries, France, Egypt, Nigeria, even Canada. Someone just subtitled the speech in Korean." Kade stopped. "That fast?" She nodded, eyes wide. "We didn't even push it. It's organic. It's raw. People feel it." But behind their adrenaline was a memory. A night just 48 hours earlier, inside a cramped hotel suite overlooking the Bosphorus, where Traore had made a decision that terrified them all. He had gathered them after dinner. No script in hand, just that little leather notebook. "I want to mention Iran," he said simply. The room froze. Miriam dropped her phone. Kade leaned back, arms crossed. "You know what that does, right? Western media will twist it. Arab press will overanalyze. Opponents back home will scream betrayal." "I won't praise or condemn," Traore replied, "but I won't pretend not to be moved by something that deserves reflection." Silence. Kade ran a hand through his hair. "Then we control everything else. No interviews, no social posts, just one camera, one message, no edits." Traore nodded. And then came the details. Mariam suggested filming the pre-speech rehearsal, not for promotion, but for documentation. "People trust what feels unpolished," she said. Kade wrote up contingency statements in case international backlash hit hard. They prepped for everything: anxious allies, political blowback, internal dissent. But Traore, he spent most of that night alone, reading the same page of that Iranian book under a desk lamp. He circled one phrase over and over in ink. "Power that requires noise is power on the brink of collapse." Now back in the present, Mariam looked up from her laptop. "BBC just called. They want a statement." Kade didn't even blink. "Number one, we say nothing. This was a whisper meant to echo. Let it echo." Just then the door opened. It was Traore. No suit, no guards, just a plain gray sweater and his usual calm. "They're talking out there," Kade said, standing. "Everyone's talking." Traore gave a small smile. "Good," he replied. Let them talk, but we don't chase the moment. We carry it. And with that, he left as quietly as he came. The team stared at each other. No high fives, no celebration, just the shared knowledge that they had just walked a tightrope with the whole world watching, and somehow they hadn't fallen. Not yet. The next morning, something strange happened. Newsrooms that usually opened with conflict zones or market crashes led with a headline few could ignore. The young African president who quoted Iran and silenced the world. On CNN, an anchor paused mid-segment. We expected controversy. Instead, we got clarity. Al Jazeera aired the full, uncut speech, replaying the moment Traore whispered, "You don't have to like a river to drink from its water." A panelist from Jordan teared up on live television. In France, a notoriously skeptical talk show opened their roundtable with, "This man just taught us the art of disagreement without disrespect." Even Fox News, known for its hardline stance, ran the clip with a headline that read, "Burkina Faso's leader, brave or calculated." But deep down, even the skeptical voices couldn't deny it. He didn't grandstand. He didn't provoke. He simply spoke, and the world listened. Meanwhile, something else was brewing, not on the airwaves, but in the hearts of people. In Tehran, a university student named Samira posted a clip of Traore's speech on her Instagram with one caption, "He saw our humanity, not our headlines." By noon, it had 500,000 views. In Chicago, a philosophy professor rewrote his lecture notes. "We've spent so long studying what divides East and West. Maybe we should start asking what humbles both." In Nairobi, a high school debate team watched the speech together. One student stood up afterward and said, "He didn't agree with Iran. He respected the soul of a man. There's a difference, and I want to speak like that one day." A hashtag began to trend globally, quiet power. But it wasn't just the public. Behind closed doors, embassies scrambled to decode the ripple. A leaked memo from a Western ambassador read, "Traore has done the impossible, quoted Iran and made it sound like wisdom, not provocation. We should proceed with caution." An African diplomat texted his colleague, "This is a shift." He just redrew the map of global respect, not with borders, but with words. Even in Iran, reactions varied. State media praised the moment cautiously. Reformist outlets called it the bridge we've been waiting for. One editorial read, "We spend billions defending our image." This man uplifted it with a sentence. But perhaps the most stunning reaction came from an unexpected place. A U.S. Navy officer stationed overseas anonymously posted on Reddit, "I've been taught who to fear." But watching that speech, I felt something different. Not fear, not agreement, just respect. By nightfall, Ibrahim Traoré's team was flooded with interview requests. The Guardian, NPR, Deutsche Welle. They declined them all. And yet the message traveled faster than any campaign could have designed. Because it wasn't polished, it wasn't perfect. It was true. In a world addicted to volume, one man had whispered. And that whisper had echoed through palaces and prisons, classrooms and cafes, mosques and ministries. And the world, against all odds, leaned in closer. A week after the summit, the headlines began to fade. New crises emerged. New politicians barked louder. But in the quiet corners of the internet, in blogs, in classrooms, in coffee shops, Traoré's message still lingered. In Paris, a university professor redesigned her ethics syllabus. "We'll begin this semester," she said, "not with Plato, not with Kant, but with a man from Burkina Faso who reminded the world that power without humility is noise." In a small town in southern Iran, a teenage boy named Mehdi wrote an open letter. It was handwritten, scanned, and shared by a local teacher. It read, "President Traoré, no one here ever thought an African leader would defend our dignity. You didn't say we were right, but you said we were worth hearing, and that's more than most have ever said." Back in Burkina Faso, Traoré never addressed the speech again. He didn't hold a press conference, didn't ride the wave. Instead, one Friday morning, he disappeared from the capital. No official schedule, no public notice. He was later found, not by journalists, but by a 10-year-old boy named Abdul, kneeling beside a crumbling fountain in a forgotten town near the Mali border. He was wiping dust from the stone plaque that read, "To the ancestors who dared to dream." The boy blinked. "Are you the president?" Traoré smiled gently. "Sometimes." Word spread fast. But by the time reporters arrived, he was gone again. 2 days later, a photo surfaced, blurry, no flash, of Traore sitting cross-legged inside a centuries-old mosque in Istanbul. No guards, no press, just him, a book, and a prayer rug. The caption read, "He didn't need a microphone this time." That same evening, a group of international students gathered at the university steps nearby. Different faiths, different languages, but one voice. They held candles and read aloud quotes from the summit, not shouting, just whispering them into the wind. One girl, a Palestinian studying architecture, spoke last. He didn't flatter a nation. He respected a soul. He didn't break alliances. He broke expectations. And somewhere between Istanbul's towers, Tehran's alleys, and Ouagadougou's red earth, the world felt something rare. Not agreement, not outrage, stillness. A reminder that leadership is not how loud you speak, but who listens when you're done. Months later, Time magazine would name Ibrahim Traoré the quietest voice of the year. But for him, the real award came in a letter slipped under the presidential door. No stamp, no sender, just 4 words written in perfect calligraphy. "You made us human." He read it once, then folded it gently, placed it inside the back of that same leather notebook from the summit, and whispered to no one in particular, "Let silence keep working." In a world where leaders shout to be heard, Ibrahim Traoré had done something extraordinary. He whispered, and the world stopped to listen. He didn't seek to divide or conquer. He sought to understand and be understood. And in that moment of quiet courage, he reminded us all that sometimes the most powerful words are the ones spoken softest. His message wasn't just about Iran or Africa or diplomacy. It was about our shared humanity, about the bridges we can build when we choose respect over rhetoric, understanding over uniformity. That's the power of quiet leadership. That's the legacy of a man who dared to speak truth in a room full of power. And that's why his words continue to echo long after the cameras stopped rolling and the delegates went home. Because real change doesn't always come with fanfare. Sometimes it comes with a whisper that grows into a roar of understanding across continents and cultures. If this story moved you, if it made you think differently about leadership and courage, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to Hill Stories for more incredible tales of human dignity and quiet power that change the world.